Good evening, everyone, and
Good
welcome.
evening.
Hit me with the music, Mike. Come on, I know you got it over there.
You know what? The most interesting thing happened.
You
And
want?
this is the way to start the show, This
There you
proves
go.
it's live. This proves we
That's
don't know
true.
exactly what we're doing half the time. But here we go. And you got the music going. It's content, late night.
Late night.
It's so late, Derek. How do we do this at 7 p.m.?
I don't know, David. If you're not familiar, our Sunday show is at 8 a.m. And the first thing, yeah, that's everyone's response. Is why?
Like, you saw the pain. He was like, oh,
yeah. So as compared to that, this is our very, very late night show.
Okay.
And yes, as our guest this evening, we have Mr. David DeAndre, all the way from the great north of the wonderful country of Canada. David, thank you for joining us this evening.
Yes.
My pleasure.
Mike, how did you first connect with David? I feel like I always ask this.
All right, I'm just going to blow David up right now because I found him on Facebook, and I'm sort of like in this reconstruction phase in my Christian walk. And the stuff he writes and he posts is so insightful. I mean, he talks about Paul. He talks about Augustine. Just all these different concepts about hell. And he even has which I want to get to too. And I want to. This is a big thing right now. We're actually world premiering at this very moment the title of his upcoming book.
Oh, okay.
All right, the title is The Naked Calvinist.
That's
okay,
right.
So we're going to get into that too. And so I'm just super excited to have you up here. I mean, he has, I think you have a doctorate from Yale. Is that correct?
That's right.
He's an incredible musician. He's been on this spiritual journey. Just a super interesting person that I found on Facebook.
Thank you.
David, if you don't mind, for the listener and the viewer, can you talk a little bit about the work that you do now and what it is you're involved with?
Okay. Well, my PhD is in musicology, so my professional teaching life is teaching music history and courses in pop music history, for example.
Okay.
But classical music history, classical music appreciation. But during the pandemic, there's been a lot of changes in the nature of teaching and the structure of the department. So I have kind of a imposed sabbatical, and I took the last year to write the first draft of a book that I've been wanting to write for a long time. I have a degree in theology from a Bible college, and right at the moment of my midlife crisis, when I was on the mission field itself, I was in Kiev, Ukraine, everything just melted down. And at that very moment, I was offered to teach Bible courses in a Bible college founded by missionaries. And I was very ambivalent about the assignment because I felt that I had really left Christianity for good, but I had to get back into the Bible and look at it in a different way. And so when I began to teach it, I found a good way for me to approach it, which I felt was satisfactory to my way of seeing things at that time. And I taught for 6 or 7 years, and it's what I taught, and the basis of all of that is what the book is about.
Really?
Wow. So I saw the Bible in Bible college as God's inspired word and holy, infallible, etc., like the standard stuff.
Yeah.
But when I started teaching the Bible after my midlife crisis, I couldn't teach it that way, and I couldn't teach it as a proselytization, as like a missionary, trying to get the students to use it like a devotional tool or to convert people with it. I approached it more like a work of literature, a work of art, a work of literature. And I began to see how the authors really project onto the world and onto God all of their fears and a lot of guilt.
Hmm.
And based on how they saw God and the way they talk about the world, I could read through their projections. In a way, you've seen preachers who preach against prostitution, and it turns out they're visiting prostitutes every week, or preachers who preach against homosexuality, like it's the worst thing in the world. It turns out that they're having affairs with men in the church or whatever. You can kind of see that going on with the biblical authors as well. And so once you get to see that, you begin to see that the Bible is not fixed and set in stone and holy and inspired. It's a very human production, and it takes away some of the stigma or the fear of reading the Bible in that way. So that's what I'm doing now. I'm writing the book and then posting on Facebook excerpts from the book and starting conversations about those topics.
So after you got your theology degree, then you went on mission? Is that how that works?
Okay, well, I did a double degree at Philadelphia College of Bible, a degree in Bible and a degree in music. It took me 5 years. It's a standard 5-year program at that school. And I didn't really know what to do after I graduated. So I went on a summer missions project to France and played piano concerts with a friend of mine in the homes of missionaries. When I got home that summer, I still didn't know what to do. And I got a call from a church to be their full-time minister of music in the Philadelphia area.
Oh, wow.
And I did that for a couple of years, long enough to know that I would rather be in academia. And so I went back to school. I went to Temple University in Philadelphia, right when Temple was a big basketball powerhouse. You might remember, I don't know how old you guys are, but that was in the mid-'80s. So maybe it's before you were born.
Well, thank you, but no. I was 74 for me. So, okay. I was very young, though.
Well, the basketball coach at Temple, he just died a couple of days ago, Cheney.
Oh, wow.
Oh, wow.
But anyway, then that was the moment when I went back to grad school, when I was no longer a professional Christian. And I didn't need to hold to any party line. I was free to do or think whatever I wanted. I was married to a very conservative Christian woman, my ex-wife now, but we were very conservative at the time. I mean, in the early 80s, I really did think that AIDS was God's punishment on the gay community. Like, I was really that way. But I started to gather some gay friends in grad school, and not Christian ones at all. And you know what? I found out they weren't the monsters that I thought they were. And they started opening my mind to rethink what I had been taught. And I thought, maybe what I believe is just because I was taught it, maybe it's not true. So I just started from scratch. Does God exist? And can I live in a world in which God doesn't exist? How, answering that question. And that process took a lot of years. It took at least 15 to 20 years to really start to put the pieces together.
Yeah.
Wow. That's
so
incredible.
When you were, what is your, would you say is your religious upbringing like? Were you from a very conservative home?
Yeah.
What kind of led you to all this?
My father was a Baptist minister.
Okay. Yeah.
So, and he was, we were from Philadelphia, but we moved to Altoona, which is in central Pennsylvania, a very conservative blue collar place. And our church was a typical conservative Baptist church with lots of rules and regulations. My mom wasn't allowed to wear jeans to the church picnic, for example. And, Sunday was a day of rest. We weren't allowed to watch TV until after the Sunday evening service. And then we would watch Mission Impossible on TV and eat pizza after the service. But then you're back to your other question, though. After I did all the grad school stuff, an academic career didn't open up right away. And we had started a family, and we had 3 sons by then, and I wanted to support the family. And it was getting harder and harder to find an academic position because they wanted your PhD plus publications. And I was just lucky to finish the PhD with having the children and everything.
Mm-hmm.
So there was an opportunity for me to go to Kiev and work with an organization which was humanitarian, but it was also musical. It had a big choir and orchestra that toured America to raise money for the humanitarian aid. And I was well suited for that. And we just picked up we raised support. And then we went to Kiev to work with that organization. But by that time, I was so far from typical conservative Christianity in my mind. I wasn't really telling anybody. And I went around to the churches raising support, feeling like a total fraud. Like I knew the words to say to raise the money.
Sure.
I knew how to play the game by that time. I had been a summer missionary twice, and raised all the support for that. So, and by the time I got to Kiev, inside that organization, I just couldn't do it anymore. But we had already sold everything and transplanted ourselves over there, and everything really hit the fan very quickly. So that's the part at the end,
Right.
And then the real learning actually began. And I was around 41 years old. I thought I knew a lot, but honestly, in the next several years, that's when I really began to understand how life works, what the Bible is all about, and everything from that point.
Wow. So what do you want to jump in, Mike?
I just wanted to say something. It reminds me of Ram Dass a little when he says to become nobody. And you go, and I have a similar experience too, in my 40s. And it's like it's such a it's amazing to see, and hear what you're saying, because it's such a long way to go.
Yes.
Just to get started, and it's incredible. And Derek and I have spoken of that a few times, and I really think that there's something to that. You have to become somebody before you can become nobody, and then you just kind of get started, and it's almost like point A. It's incredible.
Well, the true humility comes when you realize you really don't know anything, and when you really recognize, okay, I really don't know anything. It doesn't mean that I'm nobody. It's just that what I thought was true, and I was somebody because of that.
Yeah,
it's recognizing that I need to relearn from scratch what everything is. And
and particularly, when we live in a culture as we have in America for at least the last 50 years, that's so materially obsessed. I mean, David, you were a PhD, you had a family, I'm sure you had a house and everything. Like by all, again, materialist measures, you had everything figured out. But of course, and this happens to people so frequently that we have a common thing that happens, which is called the midlife crisis, which is probably culturally not a good thing that many people experience this. But I suppose that's what it is. That you've done all this material work without any kind of like inner work, or it happens different to everybody.
Right. Yeah. I always thought the midlife crisis was around 50 years old. But it turns out it's more around 42. For me, it was a little earlier, but it's kind of like the theory of the cycles of 7. If you go 7, 14, 21, 28, 35, 42, there are moments in your life when change is more possible, or the energy is moving differently in those moments. Think of the age of 21. You make a lot of changes at 21. And society is programmed a lot that way for 21.
Right.
But so for me, it was around 41, but it's around that time. I don't know about you, Mike.
Yeah, I would say it's pretty damn close. It's very similar. I'm 46 now, and it's in 2012 we left the cult. So it's pretty much in the same ballpark.
Yeah. And Derek, you haven't hit yours yet, have you?
Yeah, I guess not. I guess I have that to look forward to, I
You can
guess.
learn some cards, you can avoid one.
Yeah,
That's
you
what I'm
can-
trying. I'm desperately
Yeah.
trying, David. I really am trying. So when you were in the Ukraine, was there like you said, obviously that's a big, long process of this kind of like disillusionment and sort of clarity.
Mhm.
But was there a like moment where the rug really got pulled out from underneath you and you thought like, wow, I cannot do this anymore?
Yeah, well, I should be completely candid, and tell you the dirty story, right? When we were setting up to move to Ukraine, everyone and all the missionaries there had a like a nanny who, and you can already tell what's going to happen, but they had a nanny who would take care of the children and help with the shopping because you didn't know Russian when you arrived. We didn't know any Russian when we arrived, so we needed a lot of help. And my one stipulation was that the nanny would have to be significantly older, like a grandmother type, to kind of remove any temptation, shall we say. And when we first got our nanny, she did seem significantly older than me. But at the time, I didn't realize that Ukrainian women age quite quickly. And she was actually closer in age to me than I realized. And every time she came to the house, she was like sunshine, breath of fresh air, and so joyful. And I ended up kind of falling for her. And that's what was the catalyst for this crushing decision I had to make. I needed to get honest with everyone. So it was on that front, on that romantic front. I couldn't carry on like an affair. I snuck around a little bit, but it just wasn't going to work. Plus, with the mission, the thing that sort of broke it for me was we had a prayer circle. The missionaries came to our apartment, and we all sit around on chairs, in a circle, and we're going around praying. And for many years, I had questioned the whole idea about prayer. If God is omniscient, why do you need to tell God your needs? It just didn't make any sense to me. And it was sort of like praying to Geppetto, Santa Claus in the sky. I really need this, and I'm a good kid, so please give it to me, that kind of thing. By the time they got around to me in the circle, I just couldn't pray. And there was this long pause.
Oh boy.
And the leader of the person who's supposed to pray at the end just let it go because he thought, well, David's going to pray. But I didn't,
Wow.
That was it. I just couldn't do that anymore. And then there were some people who came from London or England to look at the humanitarian aspect of the mission. They were very impressed with that, but they started grilling the head of the mission about the Christian aspect. And they were just really ripping into him. And, you're trying to proselytize and do all this stuff. It's just ulterior motive. And they were going on. And inside me, I thought, you guys are right. I agree with you guys. Eventually, I knew. And so on the same day, I sat down the head of the mission with my wife. They sat on a couch, and I sat on a chair opposite the couch. And I left the mission and left my marriage. So at that point, the head of the mission blocked all the money that we had raised and then told everyone in the organization to have no contact with me. My wife went back to the States with the kids and took all the money out of the bank. So you ask about, hitting bottom. But at that moment, there were some Americans in Kiev who, one of the Ukrainians found out about my situation. She said, I really think you should meet these people. And she set up a dinner at her place, and I met them. And the woman in particular, her name was Carol Howe, and she's a teacher of something called A Course in Miracles. And it's a wonderful text, which is about self-healing. But it is a channeled text. So I was not open to channeling or anything like that at the time. But Carol's partner found out about my financial situation. When he found out, he just took out his wallet and he gave me $200. He said, "Here, I think you need this."
Wow.
And then I got the job at the university, and that tided me over until I started earning money, and then started teaching the Bible and music, as well as history and other things, literature. I was teaching several courses at the same time, but that was the bottom for me, not to mention the horrible guilt I was feeling about breaking up the marriage and my children. It was really, really a hard time. I was racked with guilt all the time. And that's another part of the story, dealing with things that we feel guilty for. How do you deal with those things, you know?
Right.
Yeah.
So how what's the second half of the story? How did you go from that point to where you are now?
Right. So as I was figuring out how to teach the Bible, and reading A Course in Miracles, A Course in Miracles has a lot to say about the fearful projections of the biblical authors and our own projections and guilt projections, and how to identify those and how to heal ourselves and find forgiveness for those things that we feel guilty for. And once I started noticing the guilt and the fear in the biblical authors, I started to really put so much together in my mind and find healing for myself. And then correspondingly, when you find healing for yourself, your relationships start to heal. You no longer look outside or look to your partner to resolve all the issues inside of yourself. You know, we have this mistaken idea that we are looking for our better half, or we're just a half of a person and we get, you know, a half to fill us. And all of that is not true, but that's approaching relationships from a neediness, that someone needs to fill the hole that you can't fill yourself. And once you learn how to fill the hole yourself, then you don't use guilt trips on your partner. You don't find that you get angry as much. And now I don't hardly ever get angry because the anger has been resolved inside of me. Therefore, it doesn't poison my relationships.
It's so funny that you mentioned A Course in Miracles, David, because I just finished reading A Return to Love by Marianne Williamson.
Okay.
And which is sort of her text on A Course in Miracles. So A Course in Miracles is the next one I have to get to.
Oh, you should.
That's synchronicity that you mentioned that. When you say that it's a channeled text, what does that mean? What do you mean by that?
Okay. Well, channeling is when a person like you or I starts to hear a voice. And at first, they often think they're going crazy. And in the case of A Course in Miracles, the person was a professor of psychology at Columbia University, Helen Schucman. And she started hearing these voices telling her, you know, I have information for you. You need to write this down. Write this down. And she told her boss, Bill Thetford, he was the head of the Department of Clinical Psychology at Columbia. So we're not talking about weird people, you know, we're talking about legitimate academic people recognized in their field. And she told her boss, I'm hearing this voice and it says, write this down. And he said, well, write it down and bring it to me in the morning. We'll look at it. If it's total nonsense, we'll rip it up and throw it away. And then we'll deal with your problem. So she started writing it down. And when she brought it to Bill, it was so cogent and such intelligent material. This voice knows Freud, knows Carl Jung, knows all these things, has an encyclopedic knowledge of Shakespeare, can quote the King James Version of the Bible all the time, and is always making allusions to it. And the text eventually, as dictated through Helen, is in iambic meter, like Shakespeare. So, ba-bum, 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 in that meter, the whole text. And we're talking thousands of pages. So it's very, very intelligent material, but it comes from a voice, shall we say. But there are other works like this. One notable one is the Seth material that was channeled by Jane Roberts up on the Hudson there, not far from you guys, mid-state. She started channeling a voice, and it has come to a dozen books. She's no longer around in the physical world, but the material is extremely intelligent. This person can discuss quantum physics and all this kind of stuff. So it opened my mind that this is a possibility. And the Course, A Course in Miracles, the voice identifies very closely with Jesus of Nazareth, who lived 2,000 years ago. You might have heard of him. And when I first realized that it was an entity that might be associated with Jesus, I just got goosebumps all over. And when you read it, Derek, when you get to it, you'll get to that in about 10 pages in the text. You'll start to realize, oh my gosh, is it really possible? And the longer you go, it's more and more convincing that it is kind of associated with a non-physical entity who might be associated with the entity that we consider to be Christ. So that's what it means to be channeled. Now, when Carol told me about it, she was doing a seminar in Kiev at the time. When she told the group, all the alarm bells were going off in my head, thinking, oh, this is wacky stuff, Right. But you have to read it yourself. And once you read it with an open mind, you'll see, there's a workbook that has 365 meditations. And they progressively take you along to kind of remove the bad ideas and the bad beliefs, the toxic ones, and replace them with loving ones. It's an incredible course. It has been called the greatest book to appear in the Western world since the King James Version of the Bible. And that was the head of the California State school, the system, California State school system. So there's a lot of people who are highly educated, for example, who really get into the course, and it makes a big difference in their lives. It's now been translated into dozens of languages, and I recommend it to you, Derek.
Wow, yeah, I did not know that was the origin story of Course in Miracles. And I do think if you look back through history, there are some examples of people being spoken to and having, writing down text and transcribing things as opposed to thinking. I'm a big fan of Jack Kornfield, who's a Buddhist teacher, and he told a story one time of he was on a retreat with other Buddhist teachers, and everybody's, they all are authors and have best-selling books and stuff like that. And one day they had a discussion about well, where do you get your ideas from? And I was like, well, I don't know. I was looking out the window one day and I just started writing something down. Or, I don't know, I was mowing the lawn and I started thinking about this thing and I had an idea, so I went and I wrote it down. And he said, by the end of it, the only thing we were certain of was none of us had written any of our books.
There you go.
So I think that's an interesting way to look at creativity, or even like life itself, that we're kind of a vector through which ideas flow through.
Yeah.
Friend of the
show. Could be, a pool of knowledge in the non-physical realm, in another dimension, and we tap into it.
That's so fascinating you mentioned that too, David. Friend of the show, Julie McVeigh, says, I could be wrong. From what I understand, the messages are not always channeled through auditory, non-physical ears, but also downloads of information or knowings.
Right.
Julie was on the show last week, and we did mention this about a sort of like, I think it's a Jungian idea of the collective unconscious.
Right.
There's, this sort of like neural network of complete knowledge that we are, sometimes tap into, or sometimes given messages from.
Yeah, and the Course says that all minds are connected. And so you can tap into generally the mind, or the mind of God, or whatever that might be. But you can also tap into what other people are thinking. It says there are no secret thoughts. And when you finally understand how to listen to that voice, and for me, it's usually a short word or two. Like I sit down and get very quiet and just say, what should I do? And the voice will say, go now. And for example, I did that, and it said, go outside. That's all. I got dressed real quickly. I went outside, and there across the street was the coordinator of my music course that I was teaching in Brussels. And he was taking a tour of my neighborhood of Art Nouveau houses. And he was right there in front of my building. And a big smile came across his face. He walked across the street and he said, I was just starting an email to you today about the organization of our course. And I said, well, here I am.
No need. I'm here.
So, like, that voice, for me, it's not a long script, like, write all this down. For some people, they do get incredible downloads, but others get it right on the spot. You probably have heard of Esther Hicks, who channels Abraham. I don't know if you've heard of Abraham Hicks. The Law of Attraction.
Oh, okay. That I've heard of, but I didn't know the name.
She goes into a trance really fast, and then a personality comes through and starts talking to the group. There's another guy who does this, Daryl Anka, and he channels a personality called Bashar, and he closes his eyes, and then Bashar talks to the group, but it's clear that Bashar can see the people, even though the guy's eyes are shut. And it's really intelligent material. He talks about how quantum physics works with the idea that you create your reality. And when you follow your highest excitement, it's a question of raising your vibrational level. And then you click in with other people and other situations in synchronicity who are at that level. So you've already mentioned synchronicity, Derek, right?
Yes.
That's the way it works. You just read Marianne Williamson's book. I'm now talking about A Course in Miracles. There's no clearer example of synchronicity.
Oh my goodness, that is that is quite interesting. And even I know that Ram Dass, towards the end of his later years, spoke to a sort of spirit or a voice named Emmanuel, who he would have conversations with, and it was a sort of non-physical being. I just want to say that Julie McVeigh says that Derek will become a fundamental Christian at 40. That'll be his midlife crisis. We'll see. Who knows?
Look out.
All I can say is the grass is greener on the other side of the fence.
Yeah, if you got to climb the mountain, you got to climb it, Derek.
I suppose so.
A Course in Miracles. You cannot blend the Bible and A Course in Miracles. It takes all the concepts of the Bible and terminology from the Bible, like atonement and forgiveness, but uses them in an entirely different way. And one of the concepts which is really hard to wrap your mind around at first is that there is no sin. There is only what we might call mistakes. Sin implies a lot of things. Sin implies permanent guilt. And for that, something needs to die. A penalty has to be paid. And in Christian terms, it's usually in blood, with a goat or a lamb. And then Christians say that ultimately God's Son paid the price. But what the Course says is that we make mistakes, and mistakes simply require correction. And the correction occurs in the non-physical dimension as well. And it can also go back in the past and into the future and correct the record, because time is simultaneous. It's a holographic universe.
Mm-hmm.
So you make a change, and if you believe in reincarnation or not, but let's say it's true, you have many simultaneous lives. If you make a change in one life, it changes all the other lives immediately. So mistakes I can deal with. I regret making mistakes, but I can vow not to repeat them. Sins I can't deal with. Someone's got to die for those, and it doesn't help me at all that an innocent man died for mine. That's the Christian message, and you're reminded of it all the time. An innocent man paid the price because you're a miserable sinner and couldn't figure it out the first time, right? So, and God holds all that against you. So in a certain psychopathic way, he'll send his own son to die because he needed someone to satisfy his own requirements for justice that he couldn't alter in any way, except that someone had to die for them, right? It makes no sense to me, but I spent 40 years thinking it was true.
Here's an interesting question from our friend John. Does intent have a role to play in how you differentiate a sin versus a mistake? So is it about like what happens, or is it about what you were trying to do?
Well, what do you guys, what's the first thing that comes to your mind when I say sin?
Is
it a positive word for you?
Certainly not. No.
Right. So that's what I mean. It has a lot of connotations, which also imply an external God who can punish you for those things, and send you to a place where you're separated from this external God forever because of them. There's a lot of baggage to that word, sin. So I don't even use the word at all. There's no difference in my mind between intention or whatever. You can talk about your intentions. If they don't come from love, they're not coming from the right place. They're probably coming from a place centered in your ego, which is looking for some gain for yourself, and not from a place of unconditional love. In that case, it is a mistake to listen to the voice of your ego. And anytime you do make mistakes. Now, if you want to call them sin, you're free to do so. But again, you're implying a lot of stuff about that. One thing we need to all figure out is who we are ultimately. The Greeks said one of the highest things for the Greeks was to know thyself. If you are a frail, vulnerable body on a planet that's circling a star, and that's all you are, then nothing can be forgiven. If someone shoots you and that's the end of your frail little body and that's the end of you, how could you forgive that? Or someone does terrible things to you. It's very hard to forgive those things. But if you view yourself as an eternal being, that adds a different perspective to what is sin or mistakes. ultimately, if we are eternal beings, and I really mean eternal, that means nothing can extinguish you. And if we truly are, then I can forgive all things that are being done to me in this temporal lifetime. And I can also forgive myself for things I feel have hurt other people, because ultimately, permanent harm cannot be done. Temporary harm, yes. And bodies can harm other bodies, for sure. But if we are on the level of spirit, eternal beings, ultimate harm is not possible. And you eventually get to see things that were done to you as learning experiences that you could not have learned otherwise in this lifetime. And then you begin to see the other person as your savior, so to speak, as opposed to your persecutor. Because they've helped you access inner resources that you never would have accessed without going through those things. And that's the basis of forgiveness, as far as I'm concerned.
Yeah, I think that's an interesting point about even just the term sin, David, that like too many kind of things have been paperclipped to that over time. And that is my concern. Mike, how do you feel about that? Like, you must have that concern that some of the Christian terminology has all this negativity and like preconceived notions, be they correct or incorrect. Like, can that stuff be stripped away to get back to that actual truth?
Yeah, I mean, it's a little bit complicated and it's a little bit simple. I think what, like the book I'm working on, the gift wrapped up in a nightmare. It kind of speaks to what David was just speaking about. Where this person that we would think of as the bad guy in the movie, right, is actually, and that's what I've come to learn. If I didn't have that terrible experience, first of all, I never even read a book until I had to start reading, because I knew something was wrong with what this guy was doing. So that pushed me to start reading. Then as I started reading, I started to learn this guy was all wrong about everything. And then I started to think, wow, I can learn a lot. There's so much I don't know. Then I kept on pushing. And so it propelled me to a more, dare I say, honest spiritual quest, And one of the things I've come to believe, when you have all the terms, you have different ideology. Some people have a high Christology, some people have a low Christology, but I've come to believe that, and I still believe this even in the cult. I believe that there's people even that are there right now who, even within the context of that dysfunction, can even have a spiritual journey, that's genuine and lead them somewhere. So I'm getting to this place where it's sort of like an openness to, like, from where David's coming from, or from where someone who might have a little bit more of a, they still haven't unpacked a lot of things, or they may never unpack them, to the woman who crochets that me and Derek always joke about. There's this joke about, what is it, Derek?
Ram Dass in like the 70s, when he was very into psychedelics and things like that, he was giving a lecture to a bunch of hippies, all people with beards and long wavy hair and stuff like that. And there was a little old lady sitting up front, and he was really talking about all this space and time and all this kind of thing. And she was just nodding along during the whole thing. So he went up afterwards and I was like, "Excuse me, ma'am." And she was like, "I completely understood everything you said." And he's like, how did you come to know about this stuff? And she whispered to him and said, "I crochet."
Yeah.
And the point being that, universal wisdom can be found on all sorts of places.
Yeah. But, could I add to Michael there? Any situation that leads you to access inner resources that you didn't know you have, and learn how to love yourself properly,
Yeah.
is a gift.
Yeah.
And I've been in some toxic relationships since my divorce. And I learned so much more about aspects of myself that I didn't love, that needed to be warmed up with love.
Yeah.
And resources about my ability to land on my feet in any kind of situation. Those are gifts. And you needed those things. We all need those things. Otherwise, we won't find those resources.
Yeah. And one of the things I've been having conversations with a friend of mine, and we've kind of been talking about how acknowledging, kind of thinking about this bad guy idea,
Uh-huh.
and acknowledging that, I'm the bad guy in a lot of people's stories too. and that kind of, that's kind of humbling because, I may be that person in a few stories that if that person chooses to.
Could I add to that?
Uh-huh.
I see Julie made a comment about being the bad guy in some of her incarnations. Yes.
Okay.
I have pretty clear information, and there's a lot of details to the story, but I might have been an inquisitor in Portugal in the 1500s, which means because I had a student in Kiev who walked into my class for the very first time. We had never met before. And when we looked at each other, we were both shocked, like, I know you. And when I got to know her later, she said, I know for sure you're the inquisitor who burned me at the stake in Portugal.
Yeah.
And I thought, well, I've never been to Portugal. I don't know. Well, when I moved to Brussels, I moved there to live with a Portuguese woman as my partner. And we visited Portugal many times, and it always felt like home. And I had a dream where I was in the Vatican, and we were looking at a new painting by the Renaissance painter. Anyway, I forget his name, but it was a new painting, and Rubens. Not Rubens. I'll get the name in a minute. But anyway, when I looked in the dream, and there was a bishop in a red bishop outfit. And later I did some fact checking, and that painting was put on exhibit in the Vatican when the Portuguese sent an emissary to the Vatican to start the Portuguese Inquisition, to get permission. And so it's possible I was a bad guy in that life. But how did it work out in this life? I was her professor, and she needed some help passing my course. I extended her deadlines because of some problems she was having, and I helped her pass the course. So, she got through it and graduated, and it was okay. So maybe the karmic aspect was completed between us in that lifetime. That's a possibility.
That is wild. It's also another bit of content synchronicity. A couple weeks ago on Wednesday night, we had Townsend James, and he, similar to you saying, oh, wow, I felt like Portugal always kind of felt like home.
Yeah.
He is like a world traveler photographer, and he went to Turkey. And he said he had this feeling like, oh, wow, this like feels... He had been to a number of countries, been to like 80 countries or something. It was like Turkey felt like home.
Yes.
And he had like a very nice experience there. I met some people. He came home, did a genealogy test, and found out he was Turkish. And he had no idea of that previous to this.
See that?
Yeah.
Yeah.
And then for you to say that,
Raphael, I'm sorry, Raphael. I just did a quick check. It's Transfiguration by Raphael.
Okay.
But anyway, yeah, I was never open to reincarnation before either. I mean, that was just a wacky idea to me. But I don't know if you've come across the research by Ian Stevenson from the University of Virginia.
Oh.
Ian Stevenson did research with children all over the world who had memories of past lives. And you kind of lose those memories by the age of 7. And he was able to do research. He's a anthropologist and a child psychologist. Kind of, it's the University of Virginia. Ian Stevenson. He's no longer around, but he did a lot of scientific method in the sense that he eliminated all the cases that you could be this or could be that, and then he presented only those that seems to be nothing else could explain the phenomenon. Mm-hmm. And it's quite compelling material. If anyone has an open mind and wants to look at it, it could be very convincing that we have simultaneous lives going on. It's not like it's a continuum, past, future, and present. They're all going on at one time. And I'm very open to that idea, in fact.
Yeah, that's fascinating too. I know that there's like a story of a Zen Buddhist teacher, Hakuin, and his student asked him, well, is reincarnation a thing? Like, what was I, a tiger last time around? And his response was always, well, do you remember being born? Which, of course, very few do.
Exactly.
So for the same reason you don't remember being born, you don't remember where you used to be or where else you may be.
Yeah.
And I know that there's people ask this same question of the Buddha himself, I believe. And I think when he attained enlightenment, so the story goes, he saw into his past 10,000 incarnations, which, you know, I can barely deal with the stress of this current incarnation that I am currently living in. Again, spiraling towards a midlife crisis. And I cannot imagine, no possible person that we have ever met could deal with 10,000 lives.
Yeah.
Like that's just, it's way, way, way too much.
But it can be helpful to know, like my wife, my current wife, she is very tuned into these things, and she went to a channeling session, and the entity told her that the reason she likes to keep the blinds and the curtains open at night is because in another lifetime, she died alone in a dark room in India. And so that explained her feeling that she didn't want to be in a closed space at night and have the light coming in. So there are occasions where it's helpful to know those things. I'm not sure how helpful it is for me to know that I was an inquisitor, except that I do have a dogmatic streak, you know. As a teacher, you sort of present it like it's the truth.
Right.
And I've been interested in theological things all the time. And as I'm doing the research for my book, I've uncovered some debates that went on near Brussels in a place called Leuven between Erasmus and Luther. And I visited Leuven many times. And there's a really weird connection with Leuven in my life. Leuven has a sister city. And, you know, usually you would think, oh, a sister city, it might be Philadelphia or a big name place. One of the sister cities of Leuven, Belgium, is Altoona, Pennsylvania, which is where I grew up.
Wow.
I saw that. But in any case, we probably have currents running through, and we just don't realize it. Like if you're really turned on by Indian food or Indian music, there could be a reason for that. You might have an incarnation from India or something similar. You know what I mean? You can explore those things yourself. Also, in your dream life, you might be traveling to those other lives and getting important information from those other lives in your dream life. So it's something, a really interesting source, a treasure trove of information that could be delved into. I don't know. Do you know David Wilcock? Have you heard of David Wilcock?
No.
He has a book called The Synchronicity Key. And he talks about regression techniques and also the channeler, Casey. David might be the reincarnation of Edgar Casey as well. But he talks about what happens between incarnations, where you're given choices, sort of like a menu. What would you like to work on in the next life? What went wrong in the last one? Maybe we could find a situation where you could do it better this time. So it's things like that. And also you make agreements with lots of people before you come. And a lot of people come together. You come at the same time. They're like soul groups. And people in these cults, Michael, they all might be in the same soul group. And you're helping each other work through the aspect of being totally dominated. You know, people get into these things because they don't want to think, right? You want to be controlled. You're afraid to think. Now you're no longer afraid to think. And people are in traditional Christian settings. It doesn't matter. It can be just fundamental Baptist, Southern Baptist, whatever.
Mm-hmm.
Evangelical churches, the pastor basically tells you what to think. And and so a lot of people they're afraid to think for themselves. It's quite scary when you start doing it. But
is that how you felt going into that though, Mike?
No, well, I mean, not consciously, if that was the case. I mean, I went into it because I didn't really know that it was just a place that I knew about that some of my family had gone to, and every experience that led me there was completely not church related. So, you know, for me, I don't know. I mean, I certainly didn't look at things intellectually. When I went there, I was more of a, you know, like I just kind of sensed things and I was seeking, and I wasn't really going by anything. So I don't know. It's kind of complicated. I'm not sure if I could say that I kind of went to find out more about what it was to, I guess, follow God, I guess, in a serious way.
Okay.
Because I came back from this trip where we went to India, Africa, Greece, you know, just all over the place. And it really like opened up my mind. And I kind of like where you explained, like you had hit this mountaintop and you kind of looked around and kind of made you question things. So I don't know.
Michael?
Uh-huh.
Was the cult, as you call it, a cult, was there a lot of control involved?
Oh yeah, tons. I mean, one of the reasons, to tell you the truth, like like Julie was on here and you're on here, and I'm hearing a lot about like mediums and stuff.
Mm-hmm.
And one of them, it's to be quite honest with you, it's a trigger for me because they used the prophetic ministry basically like a medium. So to go tell you what job to take, they would tell people who to marry, they would tell people you name it, to control people. They use basically like, I mean, it's basically the same in a sense as channeling.
Right.
And they use that to control people. And even, you know, like, I guess from the trauma of it, just the thought of listening to somebody like that, or, you know, that's telling me something it's just something I sort of more want, like a direct connection, you know, like, because it's safer to me. I know where that's coming from.
Mm-hmm.
I don't think I have the ability to discern, like, where's this voice coming from, or is it X or Y? I still feel like I can learn from it, but I don't know if I could ever fully just blindly trust something like that.
Well, it's hard to argue with God. You know, someone says, God told me that you need to.
Yeah.
So how can you argue with that, right?
Yeah.
But like you say, you need to hear it yourself, what you need to do. And my rule of thumb is always follow your highest excitement and don't let fear enter the picture, because by raising your vibrational level, when you're doing things that you really enjoy, new doors open up where you would have never imagined they were, and new people will come into your life that you never would contact or come in contact with previously. And when I made all the changes in Kiev, I was in Kiev riding the metro system and always around the city, but I never encountered the people from that organization ever again. I never ran into them on the street. Because I must have entered a parallel reality. You know, I was in the same city, but it was a different city. And I encountered people that I never would have encountered before, and that's all you have to do. And then you'll get promptings like a feeling, go there or call that person today. I need to write to them now. It's that's the voice. It might not be,
Yeah.
it might not be like I hear a voice, but a strong feeling. Let's do an interview with this person, and then you'll get a word from that person.
Yeah.
So,
No, I definitely have experienced things like that, and that's definitely something that I can relate to. You know what they say: a man with an experience is never at the mercy of one with an argument. And
exactly.
so since I've experienced that, I completely can easily accept it.
Mhm.
But with all due honesty, it's just a little. I'm excited, and I love to, and knowing me, I'm probably gonna end up reading that book. I'm pretty sure I probably will, and because it
Get
sounds
ready for
interesting,
it. Yeah.
and
Well,
I love what I love about it was because I've seen that a lot. Like I can identify with the sort of projection and also how one of the things I noticed in the cult was how the leader he became the god that he worshipped. He worshipped the monster god.
yeah.
He didn't worship the grace Jesus.
Mhm.
He worshipped the more Old Test, the more like childlike, indecisive, contradictive, and so he really, what you as a man thinketh, right? So he becomes that, and he became that type of a person, and he thought about it so much, I guess, that he actually thought he was God. And
Well, we create a God in our own image, not the other
yeah,
way around. And that's the God of the Bible. That's just a larger human ego. That's all. Full of jealousy, anger, wrath. Don't cross me. Don't cheat on me, or I'm going to fire your butt in
yeah,
hell. That kind of thing. That's the way we talk.
yeah.
Not, it's not the unconditional, loving source of all being at all.
Yeah, I believe that strongly. I believe that there's like a heavy sense of discernment. And it for me it's love. Love is really, really the like as musician. We're all music guys here. Actually, Derek's also a musician,
Great.
and the key that I tune into is love. And when there's dissonance and there's different keys playing that don't go, and that's kind of like what tells me, wait, something's off here. In a situation or something. And I've learned, because that's really what pulled me out of there. Just the lack of love and the lack of that tune of love being played. And so that's kind of what I use as a discernment tool.
Mm-hmm.
And but I mean, I have a lot of trauma post cult. I mean, even we go to a healthier church. We don't go like religiously, but we go once in a while. And even when one time someone was we were gonna hold hands and pray, and
Yeah.
even that bothered me. Just the trauma of prayer circles, of the things, the pressure, and the way it was used to kind of like say things about someone while praying, and just the dysfunction of those circles sometimes. Even that triggers me because it's like, oh wait, you know what I mean? Like and don't even go like this. Like you're gonna pray for me because that's gonna.
I know.
I might honestly, I might even hit you. Like honestly, I might because it's that so much abuse happened to me, like by someone yelling at me and saying, break him, Lord, and all like just
Oh, yeah.
always in a negative, terrible way, just
Yeah.
and it's just like So I'm still on my way, like recovering and stuff. But
You'll sort it out.
I'm fascinated by these things, and I'm definitely open to them, and that's why we had you here. But I just wanted to be honest about where I'm at. I feel it's
We
important,
should always be.
in
Yeah.
conversations, and also to respect, and because we have all listeners and people who are going to watch this from all different places.
Mhm.
And I really feel like if you listen to David and it's kind of like wait a second, like, and if you're more on a fundamentalist side, or I think you should be a little bit open, because when I dug into my history, I found out my grandmother used to read cards. I
Ah,
found out my grandmother predicted my birth when my parents were separated, and they were in New York. My mom was in New York, and she said, "You're gonna have a son," and I see palm trees. So next thing you know, she's in a car pregnant on her way to Florida with my dad, and they got back together. So, I'm not saying I absolutely, I know that I don't know. That's the only thing I'm certain about.
But you do
completely
have power
know.
in you. You do have power in you. We tend to give our power away, and these situations, you should be thankful. You now should realize you and Derek and we have the power in us. It's not outside anywhere. It's always in you.
Yeah, I believe that. That's very powerful. Even that statement is very powerful. And what's interesting is, what I loved about your story is you went from this place of fear, this place of like, fear and being sort of dominated and accepting, and then little by little you pushed away, and you got free of it, and now you're just able to explore and to know that the power is within you. That's a if you can really know that and feel that, that's so powerful. Like for a human to actually go from beating yourself up, because our self-talk, I went through a phase where my self-talk was worse than Paul Washer's preaching. And worse than he's like a hardcore like Calvinist, and which and it's worse than that. You're wretched, this and that, and my self-talk is even worse than that. And somehow through getting away from that, through letting go of things, and through therapy, and little by little, I'm actually talk to myself kind of nice now, like really nice.
That's
like you messed up. You're like, okay, you messed up. No big deal. I'm so nice to myself now. It's ridiculous.
That's the biggest process of everyone's life. The most important process. Learning to love yourself. That's it.
It's huge.
That's one of the things I found so interesting about A Return to Love and A Course in Miracles is I believe that they describe a miracle as just seeing something in a different way. And yeah, it was interesting the way it phrases Jesus and the Holy Ghost, especially. Like I never really understood what the Holy Ghost necessarily was or how that.
I don't either. I wish we would just throw that term out.
Well, now I feel like I get it. That it's kind of this. If I'm understanding it correctly, it's kind of this like force or what have you. That's this sort of mechanism between you and the universe. So that Marianne mentions, like if you're having difficulty in life, ask the universe, can I see this in a different way? Which is illustrating our point here that it's not that in a great many cases, it's not the case that the material circumstance has to change as much as you have to change how you feel about it, or how rather you feel about yourself in this scenario.
How you see it. Yeah. And that's forgiveness in the Course in Miracles. It's a new perspective. A miracle itself is when true love is shared, a moment where all the blinds are removed and you see the love behind everything. And forgiveness is a change in perspective, which helps you see the love that's there.
Right.
But we could talk a lot about the terminology and the Holy Spirit. I would say it's good the way you say it's like an interface, but it could also be your higher self.
Sure.
Or, Ralph Waldo Emerson talks about the oversoul. It could be your oversoul, which is what is sending your incarnations into physical reality. And it's able to see over the horizon, whereas you, as you think you are here on Earth, can't see over that horizon. But your oversoul or higher self can see it. And if you want to call it the Holy Spirit, that's fine. That's our source of wisdom.
Well, in the cult, the Holy Spirit was whatever the leader said. It was like code for as long as you did what he said. You know, it was like, oh, did the Holy Spirit approve for you to read that book? You know, it was always code for the leader. So they know what it is.
Yeah, well, you have the same access to that knowledge everyone else does.
Yeah, no, I'm just kidding because it's really, you know, when I look back, I can joke about it now about how crazy it actually was.
Yeah,
you know,
it's good that you can laugh now. That means you're healing. It means you are healing for sure.
Yeah, it's crazy, but I think we're like over.
Okay.
The limit here,
David. You're gonna.
I don't want to take up.
Have to come back at some point.
Yeah, we definitely need to have you.
Great, really, I've really enjoyed this.
Me too.
Me too.
David, one more time. What's the name of the book? When's it coming out?
Yes.
Well, my provisional title is The Naked Calvinist.
Yes.
I've finished the entire first draft, but now I'm going back through the first chapter to tie them better to what came later, and now I have a better feeling for the direction of the whole book. So it might be another few months till I get through all the revision, and then I'm going to be looking for a publisher and the whole process after that. So we'll see. But in the meantime, I'm posting excerpts on my personal page on Facebook and other places where I met Michael. In fact, a particular group we're both in. So you can find my ideas there, and I would love to interact with everyone who wants to find them there in the meantime.
Oh, that is fantastic, sir. David, thank you again for coming on.
Thank you very much.
Yes, I have so many tabs open on my computer now. The Seth material, Esther Hicks, Ian Stevenson, David Wilcock.
I was even gonna make note of some of them, but I was 100% sure Derek was, so I wasn't even worried about it. I was like, I don't have to write any of this down. I know Derek's writing all of it down.
Seth speaks. Seth speaks.
Okay.
That will blow your mind.
I love homework, and
the next one, The Nature of Personal Reality. Those two, I've read them both 2 or 3 times.
Nature of Personal Reality. Yeah, and we'll put those in the episode description as well if any of the listeners, viewers would like to check those out too.
Seth,
very cool.
First one, Seth speaks. Yeah.
Okay. All right. Well, thank you very much.
Thank you again, guys.
Let's do it again.
Thank you.